In the last episode, we began our adventure in this world by collecting every item in alpha version 1.0.4, and while it was interesting to see where the game started, it was honestly pretty underwhelming. A lot of features and mechanics that we take for granted just weren't there yet, and on top of that, it was a broken mess. But now it's time to move on to beta 1.7, the last version before the adventure update, which fundamentally changed the game. But surely, since it's still a really old version, it will have the same problems as alpha and will also be underwhelming, right? Not at all. This version was more than just a step up. So let's start right where we left off last time. Since beta introduced a lot of generation changes, I packed up some important items and left my alpha starter base behind, at least for the time being. On the way to the beta terrain, I already noticed a few differences, most notably that we now have sound. Also, in alpha, skeletons could shoot arrows without holding bows, which is not fixed, but it's a step in the right direction. And the last thing I noticed right away was that Steve actually grew some shoulders. It didn't take too long for me to encounter a massive chunk border marking the edge between old and new terrain. But before I could get on the other side, I checked to see if the debug screen was in the game yet, and it was. But not only that, while having this menu open, you could see an ID above every mob. Normally this wouldn't be that important, but those IDs are rendered like name tags in modern Minecraft, which means that you can see mobs through walls. This, of course, is really exploitable, and I took full advantage of that. After entering the beta terrain, it took me right back to when I first started playing this game, almost 12 years ago. After finding some new items like pumpkins and brown wool, I found a pretty good spot to set up a new base. This base would have 2 floors and a way to get on the roof. The lower floor would store all my items and workstations, while the upper floor would have a balcony and a room that contained the item collection for this version, which we made a bit of progress on. Since we traveled for most of the day, it makes sense that we still had a long way to go though. Setting up a base far away from spawn would be unheard of in alpha, but now in beta we have beds, allowing you to set your spawn point manually. The problem with sleeping is that there's a chance for a zombie or skeleton to wake you up. Most people would see this as an inconvenience, but since the pathfinding just didn't work for some reason, I used this as a low budget mob farm. On the next day, I explored the area a bit and found sugarcane, snow and spruce. Having spruce sounds great since it's the best wood type, but sadly you could only craft it into oak planks back then, since that was the only variation. I also tried to find some clay in this massive lake, but clay is pretty rare in this version as it turns out. So I got none, and by the time I got home it was nighttime. But since there were 2 discs in this version, I decided to try and have a creeper be killed by a skeleton. This was actually surprisingly easy. Just hit a creeper twice with an iron sword, lure it into water and let the skeleton do the rest. This exploration brought our total item count up a lot. After that, I did a brief mining session, making use of the X-ray trick with the mob IDs I mentioned earlier. During this I found a new ore, lapis. It allows you to dye wool blue. That's it. Well, that was underwhelming, but there's one massive feature I've yet to talk about. The Nether. Even outside of collecting every item, I wanted some glowstone for a later project. So I built a portal and went through, not knowing what would happen next. Right after going through, I was attacked by a ghast, but taking it down was simple enough, and I got away just fine. The real problem is that our portal got caught in the crossfire. In modern versions, this wouldn't really be a problem. Even a ghast could reignite the portal, but that's not the case in this version. And on top of that, I forgot to bring a flint and steel. I could have just killed myself to get back to the overworld, but there was one problem. I hadn't died yet, and I wouldn't want to go out like this. So while gathering all the items we needed, on top of an excessive amount of glowstone, I tried to think of a way to get back. And that's when I noticed that I brought wood with me. I was sure that in older versions you could only light portals with a flint and steel, but I had no choice but to try to ignite the portal by redirecting this lava stream towards the portal and have it set a piece of wood on fire. It took a bit to get this right, especially since ghasts kept attacking me, but I eventually set everything up, and to my surprise the portal actually worked again, which meant that I could finally go home and bring our item collection up yet again. Since slimes are really rare, I located some slime chunks using this heat to dig out a small manual farm. This took around an hour, but I'm sure we're gonna get a lot of slime balls out of this. Oh. Yeah, turns out slimes only spawn out to Y level 16 in this version, which meant that I had to dig out another hole, but at least this one ended up working. Now that we have sticky pistons, we could work on some new potential projects, like farms, a piston door, or creating smooth stone. Wait, what? Yeah, as it turns out, there's a machine in this version known as a block metadata changer. You see, in modern versions, every block has a namespace ID, like Minecraft Dirt. But back in this version, blocks have an ID number, like 3 for dirt. Some very similar blocks like wool share the same ID, but have a different block data value. And this machine changes the data value of the block you place inside of it, allowing you to create this. No, this is not the same kind of slab we use in our base. This one doesn't have a border in the middle. Instead, this block is called... oh. Turns out the game crashes when you hover over the item, and because of that, people just call it the crash slab, an unobtainable slab type which we just managed to obtain. And just for the sake of it, I replaced the current stone slabs in our base with crash slabs. Anyways, remember when I said that I hadn't died yet? Well, yeah, I died to a creeper. I managed to get my stuff back, so it wasn't too bad, but it's still a shame that we had a death. I mean, it's not like I would have died again. Let's just not talk about this. But why was I underground in the first place? I got all the minerals I could ask for, right? Well, yes. But after seeing that achievements exist now, I decided to try and get all of them on top of obtaining all items. Most of the achievements were pretty easy, mostly achievements that we would have gotten either way. But 2 of them were actually pretty difficult to obtain. When pigs fly, where you have to ride a pig while it's falling off a 5-block cliff, and on a rail, where you have to ride a 1000 block minecart track. I took this as an opportunity to build a railroad to our old alpha base, which is also the reason why I collected so much glowstone in the Nether. It took a while to build and it doesn't look the best, but it feels great to have our 2 bases connected like this, especially since you can't sprint in this version. But these 2 bases weren't a full kilometer apart, so I had to go further. But before then, I went on one final exploration. We still needed clay, cocoa beans and cactus, and so I looked for a desert, only to die and lose all my stuff. But that didn't stop me, and after some time I found a desert that even had some clay inside of it. So I grabbed a cactus, which is way bigger than all other items for some reason, and went to look for some cocoa beans. Except there's one problem. There's no jungle biomes yet, which means that you can only find them in dungeon chests. I mean, there's no way I'm just gonna find a dungeon with cocoa beans while exploring the surface. Yep, my dungeon luck is just as good as it was in alpha. A few days later, I finally got back home, where I crafted all the materials we found into the final items we needed, like green dye, cookies and bricks. We finally managed to collect every item in beta version 1.7, but we weren't done yet. We still needed those last 2 achievements. So I put some fences around the pig, dug a small hole and rolled the pig as it was falling down, leaving us with only 1 more achievement. After gathering some more iron, I extended the railroad track until it was finally time to say goodbye to this version. This was a really nostalgic experience for me, and even besides that, this version is just way more polished and just better than alpha, to the point where I could see myself going back to this version in the future. I can also see why people are calling this version the golden age of Minecraft, though I am missing some of the newer features like enchanting, sprinting and even stackable food. Though it was also nice to not worry about keeping the hunger bar up all the time. I'm definitely going forward with mixed feelings. I'm kind of sad to leave this version behind, but also excited to see what the early full releases have in store, because we're going to continue this playthrough by collecting every item in Minecraft version 1.4. I hope to see you again next time. Goodbye.